Welcome to Restoration Beyond the Couch, hosted by Dr. Lee Long. In this episode, Dr. Long interviews Jeddy and Dayna, a dynamic duo of Enneagram experts who work together to bring transformation to both personal and professional lives. Jeddy, a therapist specializing in personal growth and healing, and Dayna, who works with organizations and businesses, combine their expertise to help individuals and teams foster deeper connections and self-awareness. Together, they provide a powerful perspective on how the Enneagram can unlock personal and professional transformation. Join us as we dive into their journey and explore the profound impact the Enneagram has on relationships, work environments, and personal development.
Welcome, Dayna Corley and Jeddy Bowen, two of my most favorite people, here to talk about a subject, the Enneagram, that I think people, it's so funny because I feel like when we talk about the Enneagram, it's a skosh bit polarizing because people are like, oh, those numbers and all that. But then other people are like totally bought in. They totally sink into it and they have so much fun with it. And then they say, oh, well, that's so one of you, or, oh my gosh, that's your 8 popping out. And it's like this creates this little language, right? Oh, yeah. So
it's a whole subculture.
A whole subculture. And that's what we're going to explore today. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So how would you give us an overview? And I know this is a big question, but how would you all give us what would your overview of the Enneagram be?
Well, in its most simple form, the Enneagram is a tool utilizing both modern psychology and spirituality, ancient spirituality, to really discover who we really are. And in all of our glory, we have two selves, a false self and a true self, or an authentic self and an adapted self.
Right.
And at its basic core, the Enneagram has been able to identify 9 distinct personalities that all of us will fall into one of those. And there's a lot of crossover on how we manifest that personality, so it can be challenging to discover which type you actually fall into. But it's just a tool for personal self-discovery and hopefully growth.
Love that.
Yeah, I would echo that and just say it's a tool for transformation. It helps to put language to the box that you've been living in, and it's an invitation to step out of that. So.
Yeah, I love the way you guys are characterizing this because it is ancient. I mean, how far back does it go? Like several thousand years, correct?
Yeah, it's theorizing, putting historical things together, but as far back for sure as the desert fathers and mothers, and then it utilizes things out of sort of the mystics of multiple religions, multiple faiths, of the Sufis, of the Kabbalah, of the Bible, and just utilizing the traits that are similar in those mystic books. And a lot of it has been passed down orally and then put together in the last century by a few guys that kind of put it on paper and then started refining it more with modern psychology.
Mm-hmm. Now, to your knowledge, has there been any research? Have we had any studies or anything using the Enneagram? Do you all know if?
Well, using the Enneagram, can you expand on that?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
Has anybody utilized the Enneagram and studied it in a
scientific way?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of psychologists that use it. Mm-hmm. A lot of guys that are teaching on emotional health, and our emotional quotient will often utilize the Enneagram in becoming more aware of who we are that way. There is one person in particular currently, Dr. Jerome Lubbe, who has an organization called the Brain-Based Enneagram. And his work is fascinating because he really is a scientist as well as a psychologist.
Nice.
I have read his book and utilized some of his stuff, but I'm not proficient at it to be able to speak at length about. But he incorporates the way our brains work and the different parts of our brain and how they tie in with the different personality styles.
Nice. Looking at the neurochemistry and all that good stuff.
Yes.
That's nice. So it's a tool to discover yourself, would you say, because here's my take on the Enneagram, is that it's first of all, I found it to be the most usable, for my own personal sense, the most usable tool that gave me insight into why is it that I'm so driven by fun and discipline is so difficult for me, but I found a workaround that if I could look at something and enjoy as an enjoyable thing, like running. People used to say to me, you are such a disciplined person to get up so early all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not discipline. I so enjoy the people that I run with that if I know they're going to be there, that we're going to have these great conversations, and I don't want to miss out on that. So there's so much fun to be had. Yeah. And I use that as my workaround, if you will, to create a sense of disciplined outcomes. But the process was all about fun.
Yes.
And that's how I found my workaround.
Yeah.
And I think that for others, if it's utilized, I'm guessing that you guys feel the same way, that if you utilize this, it works for other people as well in the way that they're maybe bent or predetermined in their sense of who they are.
For sure. Absolutely. And in your example, we could actually unpack a lot more in there, but we won't because you didn't ask that question.
Unpack away.
Well, as a 7, you do want fun, you do want adventure, but why do you want that? And the Enneagram will get behind not what we do, but why we do it.
Right.
Why do you want that fun? And for a 7, 7s want to avoid pain.
Right.
So there's something driving our personalities that is we want to avoid something and we want to get our basic needs met. And also, the cool thing about the Enneagram is it's a dynamic system. Nobody's stuck in one place.
Yeah.
We may all have a type that we identify with because of what the motive of that type is, but we move around that Enneagram diagram and we connect to other types, and we can actually connect to every type and have some of every type within us. So,
I love that.
Yeah, but you also are, one more thing about the Enneagram is we learn about being either a self-preserving person who's most concerned about getting their basic needs met and protecting themselves and what they think they need. And we have the social person who's more about connecting with other people,
right,
and being part of the group and moving the group forward and having their role in that group space. And then there is the one-on-one, which is also referred to as the sexual. That's more about the coupling with that one other person and really connecting deeply. Well, you as a 7 are also a social 7. So when you want to run, it's the connection with others that's driven by your social also. So there's several things going on when you make that choice. And the discipline part is there for you too, because as a 7, you also go to the one space, which is an extraordinarily disciplined person.
Right.
So you got a lot going on, but it's so fascinating.
It is so fascinating. And I'd love for you to give our listeners a little peek behind what a 7, what a 1, or any other type that you want to highlight. But that's the part that to me was so freeing, so helpful. Is that I would take different personality tests because in our field, especially going through our programs, we had to take a lot of personality inventories. Right. And I had one mentor look at me and said, "You broke the test." Because he said, you have all of these sanguine qualities, but then you have this melancholic quality And he's like, I think you broke the test. And I was like, well, gosh, I didn't mean to break the test. I didn't And when I understood the Enneagram better, I was like, I didn't break the test. It's pointing to the two different places that I think I was under a lot of stress and pressure when I took that inventory.
Yes.
And what it was showing that in stress, I go to a sense of perfectionism to myself.
Yes.
And so that's that melancholic piece is that, it's that enthusiastic or that sanguine piece is that at my baseline, I would say is where I would go. But in stress, it's there. And that's where the personality inventories don't always pick that up.
Yes. And something that we mentioned also is what makes the Enneagram so unique from other personality assessments is a lot of times these personality assessments, there's a lot of emphasis on behavior and what we're seeing, right? Whereas the Enneagram is really giving language. It's kind of like lifting the lid a little bit and looking below the surface of what's actually driving and motivating the behavior. What are my core beliefs? What are those core fears that are moving me towards these behaviors? And that's what I would say makes it so unique and so helpful and provide this opportunity or invitation for transformation. And you mentioned kind of this workaround, right? Like when I understand that, I can start to kind of move to shift out of that.
Right.
But I think on the flip side, the other thing that's beautiful about it is it also, that awareness of what's below the surface really can increase our compassion for not only ourselves, but for those around us.
That's so, yes, with all exclamation points behind it. The thing that sold me on the Enneagram, I was already sold before, but the thing that solidified it to me at its core, or to my core, was I had a struggle in a relationship with a very close person. And once I understood their Enneagram number, all of a sudden for me, I was like, oh, now I understand where you're coming from. And all of the hurt, all of the pain in our interactions just disappeared. I had a better understanding that, yes, their impact on me may have been painful, but their intent was certainly more illuminated. Therefore, I could have a whole lot more space and grace for the impact.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel so personal.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, because it wasn't about me.
And the reality is we all live out of our ego or our false self if we don't realize that there's something deeper, and that false self is designed to protect us and to promote us. And if we don't, like Jeddy said, pull back the lid, undo the veil, to look deeper inside of what's really going on in our hearts, we will continue to live in the subconscious automated program that's been running our entire lives. And so change doesn't occur without an honest evaluation of what's really going on inside.
Right.
An honest yet non-judgmental evaluation.
Oh, that's so important.
Right? Because this,
so important.
What you're describing is this adapted version of us, which all of us take on a personality. It's this adapted version, and it's simply just our means for survival.
Yes.
Like, we're just surviving. We're just learning to function, right? And so I think that piece is so important, is when we are evaluating and we're really taking a deeper look at ourselves, we have to be willing to let go of the judgment and give ourselves the grace that I really am doing the best I know how to do.
Right.
Yep.
This promotes curiosity versus that sense of certainty, which certainty, I believe, often leads to judgment. I'm certain it's this, but wait, are you? And I think about what you're talking about with that false self, that ego, that adaptive self. We have a term in our field, perceptual understanding. And okay, we all know what perception is. That was my perception of it. We hear that was my truth. That was my reality. But in our field, I don't know that we all give as much credence to the understanding that perception is a lens that we look at the world through. That lens is built on experiences from the past. It's built on present experience, but it's built on how we ingested the world. And I think about the term proprioception, which is a physical term, and that's how does my body move through, how does my body navigate gravity?
Right.
To me, proprioception is the physical, where perception or perceptual understanding is the metaphysical, because it's how do I move through life with an understanding of my lens?
Right.
And do I ever take my lenses off and try to clean them a little bit to see that maybe my lens is not the factual truth, it's my understanding of it. I'm not saying that there aren't absolutes. Let me make this very clear. There are absolutes. There are. But then there's my perceptual understanding of the absolutes.
Exactly.
And
Absolutely.
how often do we navigate through those, right?
And it has been interesting because there have been studies done using the Enneagram where you take a set of twins that were raised in the same environment, and they have very different personalities, and they perceived their experiences, their traumas, differently because of the lens. And that's why I think that our personalities are part of our soul DNA. It is obviously a combination of nature versus nurture, but I think that it is innate in how we look at the world. And in the Enneagram world, it's a disconnection from what's true about our being. It's a disconnection from actually what God imprinted on us.
Wow.
One of the things in the Enneagram we love is to talk about personality is actually a mask. The Latin word for personality comes from the word mask. And so our personalities are a mask that we put on, and we move through the world with this mask because we want other people to see what we want them to see,
right.
Or we want to believe that the mask we're wearing is who we really are. But the word character comes from the word being engraved. And character, in our opinion, is the divine engraving, the divine imprint of the Imago Dei. That that's the true self. That's the essence of who we are. But we disconnect from that in order to protect and promote ourselves in the world because we don't have a manual. And all of the first 7 years of life is just programming. We're taking information in, but we don't have the maturity to know how to process that in truth. And so it's a distortion through our lens.
Right.
And that becomes the basis for the personality. And so we develop coping strategies and defense mechanisms for that promotion and protection.
Right.
And they become more ingrained with our experiences, with our hurts, with our traumas, with our unhealed pain. And we don't realize the interior infrastructure that is being built and solidified. And that's what we live out of. And without the work, that's what we continue to live out of.
Right. Which offers, as a therapist, right, it offers us so much, I guess, fertile ground to help people walk through healing from what you're describing.
And the beauty is the language is there in the Enneagram.
Right.
So it's a helpful tool.
Right.
It's not just pulling out of thin air. It's really being able to narrow down and have people relate to once they read it. They might not have been able to come up with the language themselves.
Yes.
But this gives them the ability to go, oh my gosh, I identify with that. That feels so true to me. And I don't want to be that way necessarily.
Right. I've always thought it was interesting that the questionnaires, people will say, well, I did the questionnaire and I came out this. And you're thinking, I've interacted with you enough to know, I don't know that that's accurate. Because what is the stat that it's...
The tests are about 70% accurate.
Okay.
So that's tricky, right? So, because you're right, a lot of people are like, well, I did the free online test, and I'm always like, ooh. Because we also, in the Enneagram world, like, I can't tell someone, even if I know them intimately, I cannot tell someone what motivates them, right? And so it is a journey of self-discovery that we've talked about, but just simply taking the test is not always going to be accurate, because whether we like it or not, we're answering the way we want to believe that we are, or how we want to be perceived. Another thing too is when you take the test, it's recommended to think back on your kind of early adulthood years, like early 20s, where you don't have as much stress and responsibility.
Right.
Right. And so you're probably more aware of yourself, but also more really living out of that kind of core space.
You haven't had to adapt as much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we kind of like to say, yes, take a test, but read your top few and see if one of those, like, study those a little bit and see if one resonates with you.
Again, that is what is so, to me, what's intriguing about the Enneagram is that it is a point to discover. Because there is so much complexity, and this is some of the criticism I hear, is there's so much complexity. Am I a 1? Am I a 2? A 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? And then you have wings. So, okay, are you a 7-6 wing? Are you a 7-8 wing? Oh, I was winging on my 6 there. Oh, I was winging on my 8 there. And then you say, okay, but I'm in stress, so I go to a 1 in stress. And then, oh, but I was happy, so I was going to a 5. And it's like,
and then
oh my God.
Self-preserving?
Right, you social, you one-on-one.
What's your level of health when you travel?
Right.
It is very complex, which it's really fun for those who like to geek out on that.
Right.
But for those, it can be overwhelming to think about all that too. And the reality is you are always a unique individual created in the image of God, no matter what type you might identify with.
Yes, which is that's part of the discovery process, right? Is because how do we show up in the world? How do we show up in the world? And are we aware of our impact? Are we curious of how we show up in the world? And I think this can be a large wormhole that sends you into a whole new galaxy of trying to figure out how you show up in the world. So could you give our listeners a little background on, we've said 7, we've said 1, 6. What would you mind giving us a background on what the numbers are? And
sure. Do you want like an overview of each number?
Sure,
kind of?
That'd be great.
Okay. What do we want to start with?
I'd go ahead and start with 1s.
Okay.
You want to start?
Okay, so 1s are, they're known as the perfectionists. 1s kind of see what's missing, what's broken, and they have the solution, and they know how to fix it. And so oftentimes they can come across the impact.
There you go.
Might be that people receive them as critical, but in their mind, they're really just helping because they have the solution, right? And so they can be, they tend to be very black and white people. And 1s, what sets them apart is a 1 has this voice in their head that is their inner critic, and it has been with them probably for as long as they can remember.
Right.
And many 1s, when you say to them, not everybody has that, they're shocked because it's so familiar to them. This voice that is constantly criticizing and perfecting and correcting. Am I missing anything you want to add?
No, I don't know how deep you want us to go because their most familiar emotion would be anger. And it's more of an anger that things aren't the way they should be because they have an ideal image of what the world should be like. And so they live trying to perfect that and bring that about. And not everybody has that. And so there's this inner anger that you don't see what they see. Yeah. And why aren't you helping to make this world a better place or this person a better person?
Right. And the beauty of the 1 is that they truly do have a sense of something that they're aiming for.
They do. And we kind of like to call it a superpower.
Yeah.
They really do have an innate sense of how to make things better, honestly. But all of us tend to over-identify with the personality and lose ourselves in that.
Right.
And lose perspective because of that.
Right.
And for the 1, their core motivation is to be good. They don't want to be a good person. And so their gift is discernment. They really do have the gift of discernment and are able to very quickly kind of discern what is right, what is wrong, what is
good, bad.
Yeah.
And they fear being bad.
Sure.
So they're very hard on themselves.
Gotcha.
And tend to be hard on others.
Yeah.
Because of that also.
We're trying to perfect there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want the best for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really, I do think that there's a real pure, for lack of a better word, motivation there. So, okay. So there's the 1. Now the 2.
2.
2s.
I'm assuming we're going in order.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Twos have a need to be needed. They're called the helper. Each number has a little name for it, and there's multiple names for it, but that's the two. And they want desperately to be liked. And so they go out of their way to try to meet the needs of others. And they kind of have a superpower of what others' needs are. And so they're very attuned to that, but they're not very attuned to their own
Themselves.
needs. And so they're not good at identifying what their own needs, but deep inside, they want you to know what their needs are because they know what your needs are. And they want you to meet their needs, but they will never ask you to meet their needs. So resentment can kind of build up in the twos, but they spend their lives trying to take care of others and have a just real sensitivity towards others, and knowing they could walk into a room where there's a conference being held and be sensitive to, oh, is the temperature right in this room for everybody? Is the light right? I want to make it right for everybody. And they're lovely people. They're very warm, and they look towards others before they kind of react to things or respond to things.
So it's an external orientation where it seems like a one is that with that
the one
perfectionism.
actually looks towards others also.
Yeah, there's that.
We could get into a word for this, but we're going to keep it simple and not go there.
Wait, I want the word now.
It's their
Yes.
stance, their dependence,
There you
their
go.
dependent stance.
Okay.
And our stance is basically our posture that we move through the world in, how we sort of react to things.
Okay.
And the twos posture is always looking towards others. They want to get the feedback from others.
Okay.
And again, this is subconscious. Most of our living, 95% of our living is autopilot.
Right.
So it's coming out of the subconscious part of us. So that's what twos do. They want to make sure everybody's okay.
So ones and twos are both in the dependent stance, just to clarify that.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, did we cover twos?
Yeah.
Threes?
Go for it.
Okay. Three, the word for three is the achiever, performer. Threes are, they are also in what we call the image triad. So they're very aware of how other people experience them. And so they don't necessarily move towards others the way that the twos or the ones might, but they're very in tune with, okay, when I step into this space, what's expected of me? What do other people perceive as successful? And they're able to kind of meet that expectation. Threes highly value efficiency. They're typically very hardworking and very focused on productivity. For a three, they equate admiration with love. They deeply want to be admired. And they are not in the dependent stance. They're in the aggressive, or what I like to say, assertive stance.
Right. Because aggressive has a little bit of negative connotation, right?
Which really what that means is people in the aggressive, assertive stance, they are willing to move against others in order to get what they want, right? So they've kind of got their eye on the prize or on the goal, and they'll kind of do what it takes to get there. So
when you think about a three who's achievement oriented, eye on the prize, the one who is perfection oriented, can you delineate a little bit of that?
That's a good question. Because actually the subtype of the three, which is a self-preserving three, looks a lot like a one.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good question, a clarifying question. One thing is that while threes highly value efficiency, they're okay to cut corners as long as they get the job done and it looks good enough.
Got it.
Because they want to get a lot of jobs done, right? Whereas the one really values being thorough and doing it precisely and perfectly, right? They will dot their I's and cross their T's and take time doing it. And the three doesn't quite have that inner critic voice.
Okay.
They're more focused on, again, like, how am I being experienced by those around me, and how can I set myself up to be admired? Whereas the one has this innate sense of what is right and what is moral, and they will stick with that kind of regardless of the environment or expectation, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Anything
that makes sense.
No, that's good. Ones are going for goodness. Threes are going for admiration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
Fours. I'll let you do fours.
Fours are the people that desire to be unique. And they are very connected to their hearts. They're also in the image triad. So the 2s, 3s, and 4s are in the image triad, which is most concerned with connections and relationships.
Okay.
Those 3 numbers, and we call that the heart triad also.
Okay.
And 4s just have a need to be special, a need to stand out, and to be separate for their uniqueness. And they have a great deal of empathy, like a superpower of empathy.
Okay.
And they also have this huge range of emotions. And so the 4s can often feel deeply saddened in one moment and 10 minutes later be elated over something. 4s are the person you want to sit with you in your pain and sorrow because they will sit with you in that. Whereas other numbers are ready to go, okay, enough, let's go.
Right.
4s can usually sit a long time in that, and they can sit a long time in their own. They want to deeply feel. That to them is a source of life. Where other types want to avoid feeling certain feelings or the depth of emotions because it's disruptive, for 4s, it feels like they're living, no matter how good or bad that emotion is.
Okay.
4s have this innate superpower of bringing beauty to the world. They tend to be very creative. Very often people in the arts of any kind, whether it's music or performing or textiles, whatever it is, they just have this real gift of creativity. And so the world is a better place because of that. And they have this ideal world of everybody being special and unique and getting along.
Awesome.
And they can be super challenging because they're probably the most misunderstood.
Interesting.
And at their core, they believe that there's something innately missing in them that everybody else has.
Yeah.
And so for them, they oftentimes really struggle with envy. I'm glad you brought that up.
That is true. So that feeling inside of them of something's lacking is always there.
Okay.
So there's a lot of unconscious comparison going on with the 4, and they don't ever measure up. So part of their uniqueness, part of their way of being is trying to prove that they do have something to bring to the table.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Any questions on the 4s?
No, I love how you all are putting this out there, is that there's this bottom line, humanity is beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, I understand when we operate out of our, as y'all are saying, our false self, our adaptive self, that we can be painful to other people, but the uniqueness of each type of person is just so beautiful to observe and to think about, okay, moving toward this type of individual, this is what would be so helpful for me to offer, to connect.
Yes.
Not that I need to change me.
Right.
I just need to understand them.
Right.
And it's knowing, it's giving maybe parameters, not to sound confining, but it's giving parameters to how people may show up for you or with you, and knowing how to be curious in that. So this is, to me, that's what I love about the Enneagram is learning those parameters of this is how they may show up, and it's unique to them, which is beautiful because then we can explore it.
Yes.
So we move to the 5, which is the
5 is the investigator, or
I was thinking you were going to say explorer because of what I said.
Yeah.
We explore with the explorer. No, I'm just kidding.
5s are, we talked about stances a minute ago, and 4s and 5s are both in what's called the withdrawing stance, so they go inward. 5s really live in their head. They're in the head triad, which means a familiar emotion to them is anxiety or worry. But for a 5, kind of this concept that knowledge is power is sort of what drives them. They accumulate and gather as much information as they can. And that helps them to feel competent, which is one of their top values, is competency. 5s also have, a lot of 5s that I've talked to it's almost like they have this visual of a battery or a tank of gas, and they start the day like this, and they're watching it start to go down, and they've kind of got to be back in their safe space before they're out of juice. And so they're very aware of and focused on preserving their energy, which means that they oftentimes aren't the quickest to willingly share, whether it's knowledge or insight. Fives are oftentimes the wisest on the Enneagram, but they're not quick to share that insight and wisdom, because again, they're so focused on preserving their capacity and their energy.
So would a self-preserving 5 look different than a more preserving than a 5?
Yes.
And a social 5 would still be looking at that gas gauge, so to speak, but they would be a little more willing to connect. While there's the one-on-one 5 that's really linked together with that one person, but they're still watching that as if they were self-preserving. I bet that's an interesting subtype to uncover and discover with a 5.
Yeah. Because the 5s, they hoard their resources because of that false belief that they won't have enough to get through the day. So they're constantly measuring what they can give and what they need to just hold on to. And like Jeddy said, their head is their castle. It's their favorite place to be. And they can be super creative 5s and creating in there. Many of our really brilliant people are 5s, and they spend so much time in their head, coming up with huge solutions to the world's problems. And so it is interesting, but the 5s also, because of that, they are the most emotionally detached of all the types. They value their information more than they value emotional connections often. And so you see them really withdrawing and holding on to that, because that information, that proficiency of what they own is everything to them, and they are willing to share it if you're willing to listen. But if they share it and you really aren't paying attention, they're like a turtle. They'll go back into their shell, and they're not ever going to share that again. So they risked it one time. If it's well received, that's really good, but if not,
it's backed off. Wow. Okay.
So you can imagine a 5 with a 4 wing or a 4 with a 5 wing. It has a lot of internal.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's the opportunity for a lot of internal turmoil, but there's also an opportunity to be tapped in to. I mean, like you could take over the world.
I know. Yeah.
A 5 with a 4, I think, is a real gift because it does have that emotional connection there. Where the 5 with the 6, they're both in their heads all the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So moving to the 6.
Moving to the 6.
Do you want to do 6 or me
It doesn't matter. Oh, you do 7s. I'll do 6.
Okay.
So,
or you should do 7.
So 5, 6s, and 7s, where the 2s, 3s, and 4s were all in the emotional heart, most concerned with relationships and connections. The 5s, 6s, and 7s are in what we call the head triad, or the intellectual side. They are always in their heads, so they think their way through life. They don't feel their way through life, they think their way through life. And so for the 6s are constantly thinking, but what they want most, which all of the ones in this head triad want certainty and security. That's what the head space is going for. The 6s especially are going for security and certainty. And the 6s are in the dependent stance, so they're looking towards others. They want the world to be a safe place. And so if you're a type 6, you often, if you go into a restaurant, you're going to sit where you can see the door. You want to know where the exits are. You want to know what you have to do to get out of there if something goes down. I mean, that's sort of an extreme example, but it's not uncommon.
Right.
So 6s are keenly aware of how secure they are in the world. And they're concerned with everybody's security. So they tend to be very communal in their concern and putting things in place that benefit all of the group they're in, the society they're a part of, whatever it is.
Right.
Because sixes are always in their head, they have a high level of anxiety, a high level of worry. And so their wheels are always spinning in their head, but they're never really at rest or at peace because they are constantly thinking of worst case scenarios that, well, this might happen. Well, and if that doesn't happen, this could happen. And if that doesn't happen, well, this could happen. So they're creating plans all the time. Plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D to cover their bases if something goes wrong. But they spend so much of their energy concerned with what might happen. They're not liberated to live in the now.
Right.
And what is good and true about now.
And what's so fascinating about what you're describing to me is I think about, when I was trying to type myself, thinking, well, but I identify with that. I walk in and I look at the restaurant and I'm like, what's the best view that I can have in this restaurant to see everything? And you think, oh gosh, okay, well then maybe I'm a 6. And then I think, well, wait, what's the motivation for that? The motivation in my mind is not so that am I safe. The motivation in my mind is I want to see everything.
Yeah,
I want to experience everything.
Right.
And
I might see somebody I know.
Right. And I want to say hi. But there's also that space of I am always thinking and planning, but it's not the worst case scenario.
Right.
It's for best case scenario.
Yeah.
It's how to maximize things. And so I think that that's what I love about the Enneagram is that it truly is about motivation. And that's why the test, those online quizzes are probably not as accurate because are we being prompted in each question? What's your motivation behind this?
Exactly.
Right.
And how many of us are aware of our motivations?
Right. And so we,
Not usually.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because
right.
we don't know that, again, that's that perceptual understanding of ourselves. Are we aware of that? No, not always.
Yeah.
Well, I would say very rarely are we aware. I think we in this field have an advantage. Well, it could be an advantage if we utilize it to really think through, wait, what is it? Why is it that I do this?
Yes.
Not to beat ourselves to death with that,
Right.
but it truly is to discover curiously, to discover yourself and those around you.
Right.
Okay.
So the 6s are plagued with a lot of self-doubt.
Right.
And so where the 1s have the critic in their head, the 6s tend to have a committee in their head.
Right.
And so they don't trust themselves.
Yeah.
And so that in their mind, they'll go around to different, people in mind. They'll also physically go to different people to check out things before they make a decision for themselves because they just simply don't trust that inner voice of assuring them that, yes, they can go for it, they can do it. So the 6s have to really draw up a lot of courage to move through the world and get what they want.
What a beautiful thing to observe in a 6 and to celebrate with them.
Yeah.
That's
And superpower of the 6s, they are incredibly loyal people.
yeah.
Like incredibly. And like my 6s my friends that are 6s, those are the ones that I probably am in touch with the most because they make the effort to reach out. So they're really good friends. And the other beauty that they bring, I would say, is that they're oftentimes, they are prepared for things, right? Like I love being on a play date with another mom who's a 6 because she's got an extra Band-Aid, she's got extra snacks, like she is ready. She's got the Mary Poppins bag. I'm like, thank you, I
love that. Yeah.
So I just think it's so important. It's easy to look at, the pitfalls or the downside of each type. But like you said earlier, every single type brings a unique beauty to the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to highlight.
Yeah. Okay, on to the 7.
7. Do you want to talk about 7?
You want to talk
No,
about 7?
I would love to hear y'all's take on this.
Okay, so 7s are, like we mentioned, they're pain avoiders. And how that manifests is they're looking at all their options again in their head, and like you said, they're not necessarily scanning worst case scenario, they're looking at all the options, right? 7s want options. There's this fear of being trapped, and because if they get trapped they might get stuck in pain, and that is their worst fear, and so they're always creating options. We kind of joke the 7s are the ones who they want one of everything on the menu. We just want to try it all, you know. They tend to be adventurers, tend to be life of the party people. There's something that is very magnetic about a 7's personality. People are drawn to them. They do enjoy having fun. They're up for an adventure. They tend to be yes people. And so they're really fun to have around, for sure. But again, what's the motivation, right? A lot of times it's creating the options and bringing the energy so as not to have to connect with the pain that is an inevitable part of life, right?
Right.
I'm trying to think of what else about 7s. There's so much.
Yeah, 7s are very charismatic, like you said. They really endear people to them. They have a high amount of energy. They tend to go. And when we say they're pain avoiders, it can also be just negativity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anything that kind of lowers their own energetic level, they want to avoid that if they can. And they will sometimes be non-committal, because if they commit to something, that feels like they're trapped and locked in. And that means if something better comes along, they can't do it. So they would rather, if you ask them to do something, they'll say, instead of, oh yes, put it on my calendar, good to go, they'll often say, that sounds really great. Yeah, check back with me on that. I think that would be really fun.
Well, so the healthy 7 would say that.
Yeah.
I think unhealthy 7s would say yes in the moment because it sounds fun, but if something better comes along, they have no problem.
Yeah, they better deal you.
To go to the other meeting.
To better
That's
deal
right.
you.
They better deal you.
For sure.
And the thing about it is 7s don't take things as personally. So if they better deal you, they don't think that's a big deal, because if somebody did that to them, they wouldn't mind so much. They kind of get it. But for those that don't get it, it can feel very personal.
Yeah.
Well, and them not taking things personally to that point, they are, one of their gifts is they can reframe things immediately.
Yeah.
Right? So they're kind of the eternal optimist until they're not. But they, because they're so optimistic and wanting to see the good and experience the good, they are so quick to reframe anything. Anything that may be perceived as negative, they can very quickly spin it and make it seem fine or even good or positive.
So they're one of the idealist types that wants an ideal world that's free of pain. And they see the silver lining in every cloud. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And thank goodness for 7s. It makes the world a much more fun and adventurous place.
That is true. They tend to be impulsive too. That's something.
Yes, they do.
Because they think and then act.
Yeah.
They're pretty disconnected
Yeah.
from their feelings.
And they also think if 1 is good, then 10 is better.
Yes.
You know.
More is always better.
That's right.
Right.
Did we miss anything? Anything you want to
You want to
add?
add?
No, I think you covered it all. Yes, and I'm feeling very bare right now. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Because I think you do bring up a really interesting point, is that there is a healthy side to these, each of these numbers.
Right.
And then there is an unhealthy side to each of these numbers. And there's that space of learning. Again, to me, like you all started out the conversation, this is a tool. It's a tool of discovery. And in discovery, we then, it creates options.
Yeah.
And those options are, we can operate in a healthy manner, or we can operate in an avoidant manner. And sometimes it's knowing that my option is that, yeah, I'm going to have to do some things here that I may not enjoy. And I'm going to have to be hemmed in a little bit if I say yes to this, but let our yes be yes and our no be no. And let's be loyal and stick to the things that we need to stick to, because that may be something that there may be a knee-jerk reaction to that, but I get to act opposite action, to emotion or to fear, and that we get to move through, and we may look like a different number, but it's because we're operating out of a healthy space.
Right.
So I just think that's the joy of understanding yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the 8.
One more thing
Okay.
about 7s. 7s also tend not to be terribly emotionally connected to themselves because they want everything to be light and happy. And 7s often look like threes because they're actually more interested in their image than you would think. But it's a big part of sevens is how are other people perceiving me. I want to be the fun person. I want to be liked. Yeah. So, okay, moving on to eights. So eights are in the gut triad, or what we also call the instinctual triad. And these are people that respond from that just sense of knowing. Okay, so they're not thinking their way through life. They're not feeling their way through life. They're sensing their way through life. So eights are typically very strong people because they want to avoid weakness and vulnerability. They tend to be leaders because they're also in that aggressive stance. By the way, sevens are also in the aggressive, assertive stance. So they'll go against others to get what they want. And
sevens do it in such a charming way you don't realize.
They bring you along with them. Eights, on the other hand, tend to just kind of put their foot down and go, no, I'm doing this, and so they are strong, but people are often drawn to eights because of their strength. And that can be a very magnetic pull for people that want that in their life that aren't oriented towards really stepping up and or standing up. And so they'll look to eights for that leadership and guidance. Yeah. Eights are really underneath the surface, very sensitive people, and they want to do well for people. They want to have an influence in people's lives, and they want to have an influence for good in people's lives. They are often impulsive, like sevens, because they're very quick at making decisions. Like eights sum up things really quickly. They'll assess something and they will have a decision like that. And they don't tend to go back on that decision. Now, they can be talked out of it if, with somebody coming up with a reasonable reason to consider things differently, but they're just real quick assessors. They move through life very quickly and they move forward through life. Eights don't tend to look back. And eights have a way of communicating that can be very cut and dry. They're not couching their language in softness or flowery language. Right. Not because they want to hurt anybody. They don't. They simply are so moving forward. They want to get things done. They don't want to spend a lot of time on extraneous conversations because that gets in the way of getting things done. And eights have the most amount of energy of all the numbers on the Enneagram. Sevens are right behind them. But eights and they can be like a bull in a china shop. Right. They don't mean to, but it's like they have blinders on going through life, especially the unhealthier you are. Right. You're not very aware of how you're impacting others. Sure. And so the healthier you are, you're taking that into consideration. Right. You'll modify your language. You'll slow down and bring people along. But eights are the type that if they give you something to do, they expect you to do it. And if you don't, they'll take it away from you and do it themselves real quickly. So eights are eights get each other, so we're not offended. We like the directness of how you talk to one another directly and can get underneath real quickly and not be offended by it. But eights can offend other people if they're not aware of how they're coming across. Like, I can't tell you how many times my husband will say, do you know what you just sounded like? And I'll go, no, I'm so sorry. We don't mean to. Right. It's just the way it comes out so quickly.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything about eights?
You mentioned the fear of vulnerability, and I think even just making that connection that they move so quickly and are so focused on kind of maintaining a sense of control and getting the job done. And that is a self-protective mechanism, right? Like, that's a self-defense. that keeps them from really being able to connect with themselves and connect with others, right? It's that kind of quick.
That is true. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because 8s, 9s, and 1s, those are the types that are in the gut instinctual triad.
Right.
Those types are most concerned with power and control. Mm-hmm. And that is why anger is the most familiar emotion for all three of those types. Now, they manage that anger differently. 8s tend to be more explosive and say it like it is. And so that's why when something happens, they feel it in the body. They're real connected to what the feelings in the body are. So whether it's a tummy ache over something, right, a headache over something, a shoulder strain, something is intuitively going on that they need to be aware of, because they're feeling it in their body. And so 8s are oriented towards the future. And like I said, they don't tend to look back, which means not all 8s are great at keeping up relationships of chapters in their life in the past, mm-hmm, not because they don't dearly love those people, but because there's people present in the future, right, that they're having to move towards.
Right.
And so power and control is that thing that most drives the 8s, 9s, and 1s. So, but the power and control is so important to these three numbers. We all have a need for power and control. Yeah. We all have a need for connections and relationship. We all have a need for safety and security.
Right.
But we have a dominant need, depending on what your type is. And this is the dominant need of the 8s.
Makes sense.
So moving on to the 9s, our last number that we're going to talk about. These are called the peacekeepers. Yes. And 9s, interestingly enough, have a connection to anger, but you don't see it so much, because 9s manage their anger by pushing it down, by suppressing their anger, because 9s have a desire to not have their inward peace disrupted. Mm. And having to deal with things that bother them disrupt their inner peace. And so 9s tend to go through life like this, where 4s have these emotions like this.
Right.
9s have their emotions like this.
So 9s are totally steady, and 4s are peaking and valleys.
Yes.
And lots of back and forth, right?
Yes, yes. And the 9s have a disconnect of knowing who they are and knowing what they want. It's much easier to ask a 9 what they don't want, because they can identify that better than asking them what they want. So if you're going to go to dinner, don't ask a 9, where do you want to go to dinner? There's way too big of a question. They have no idea. But you can start narrowing it down for them. Do you want Asian food? Do you want Mexican food? Do you want that? Okay, now we've landed on Asian food. Here's 3 picks. And I will force, we have all of the types in our family, because our family is so large. Right. So we get to practice with every type. And I will force our 9s to make decisions, because they could easily just acquiesce to what the group wants or what the other person wants.
Right.
And they ultimately believe their voice doesn't really matter that much. Yeah. For a 9, a lot of times they have this mentality of, if I wasn't there, it wouldn't really make a difference. It wouldn't matter. Which sounds sad to some of us, but to them, that's not necessarily this like depressing, sad thing. I think it actually kind of lets the pressure off a little bit, right? Like, if I can believe it doesn't really matter if I show up or not show up, that allows me to keep my inner peace. Yeah. 9s are in the withdrawing stance, and so that means they go inward, right? And the types in the withdrawing stance, they really do struggle to acknowledge the impact that they have on others, because again, they live inward.
Right.
Exactly.
It's interesting because there's groupings, as you all have pointed out. There's the internalizing group. There's the externalizing group, and then there's the group of trying to figure out the balance of the internal, external, and what they're trying to achieve with all of that. And I think the beauty, again, this is a tool, is that I think a lot of times when we look at a tool and we see a static, well, I am an 8, I am a 3, I am a 7, I am a whatever. We think, well, I'm stuck there. Well, I'm a 7. I don't do pain, so I'm not going to go to that. I'm an 8. I deal in realism. That hurt? Sorry, that's the truth. I'm a 3. Well, I'm achieving. Sorry, that doesn't matter to me. Or I'm a 6. Hey, I want to be safe. So if that impacts you in a negative way, sorry, I'm a 6. Yeah. And I do see people use it this way, where it is an immovable theme in their life. But I think where the health of the Enneagram comes in is this is a starting point of exploration and curiosity. Right. Now, how do I move beyond? Right. I didn't intend to hurt you. Let me say that softer. Whoa, that is painful. I need to sit in that with you. I don't want to, but I'm going to, because that's what's best for both of us. That's there, an achievement and an efficiency. Well, intimacy doesn't lend itself to efficiency. Therefore, I need to sit in an intimate moment, because efficiency could really drive the intimacy out of this. But I know that intimacy has its place as well. And so it's that moving through that I think is a starting point as a tool, not a static point.
That's right. And not to wear your type as a badge of honor.
Right.
And never to beat one another up because, well, you do this because you're this. Right. Or to justify, well, I do this because that's just who I am. I'm an 8. That's just arrogant and unproductive and unbeneficial.
Right.
And so the beauty, like you said, is moving underneath to recognize, wow, this is my way of being, but it's not the most beneficial way of being for me.
Right. And
can I grow out of that? And until we get to that place of being honest with the reality of who we are in our false self, that's really where we meet Jesus so deeply too, because we find that Jesus meets us there and he's not judging us. He knows how that developed and formed to survive in the world. He wants to walk with us out of that stronghold into a place of freedom and liberation.
Right, and authenticity.
Yeah.
I love that. And so you all have taken the Enneagram, and thank you for going through all the numbers, because it gives us a foundation for me to ask this next question. So you all have taken the Enneagram and you utilize it with teams. Mm-hmm. And so what's been your experience with that? What has that looked like?
It's really fun, first of all.
It's
really fun. I think one of the coolest parts of it is helping people to see themselves in a more honest light for the purpose of having compassion and understanding. And again, this invitation of you don't have to stay stuck in how you've been functioning and operating, but within the context of a system, whether it's a family or a team, where we've seen a lot of really just neat things happen or conversations is when the people in that space begin to understand each other and see each other in a more honest light, right? And kind of like some of the examples you gave, you begin to let certain experiences go and it doesn't feel so personal because you actually understand the motivation, right? Or at least have space to be curious about what the motivation might be and to explore that. But also it gives a lot of insight into how to move towards those individuals. And then finally, in a work setting, which we've worked with a lot of businesses and stuff, is kind of even like the roles that each person plays in that team. And, is this the best fit as far as the role or job description?
Right.
And, maybe when their boss or manager is having to have a difficult conversation, this gives so much direction and freedom to have those conversations in a really productive, effective way.
Right.
Some of our businesses we've worked with have, after we've gone in and people have identified their type, they'll put on outside their office door their name with their type. And again, it's not because we're putting you in that box. it's giving people an understanding of a deeper part of how you see the world. And then when I come in and have a conversation with you and I remember, oh yeah, you're a 7, then I can shift and expand my own understanding and even communicate differently, because the way we solve problems, the way we have conversations, and having to have hard conversations, we can adapt that to the person's style of now that takes a lot of work. It's not going to be a one-time thing, but then when you use that in families, because we've done it with families also, and they begin to understand their children, or the spouses understand each other, you really are opening a door to a different way of communicating and a different way of understanding. But again, like your work, it takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes intentionality and attentionality to be able to do the work. So for some people, the Enneagram is just kind of a fun thing to learn about, and they never do anything with it. And for others, they want to live out of who Jesus says they are, the truth of their being, and not the egoic way of our being.
What a beautiful service to offer. Because you're offering a tool. Because I'm thinking about like a couple. And if you have, like, say, a 6 and a 7 that end up together as a husband and a wife, you have someone who is always preparing for the negative, someone who's always living for the positive, and there could either be a whole lot of symbiosis there, right? That could go positive or negative, but there also could be some explosiveness there that does not go towards the positive. And understanding from where they're coming that there could be a lot of freedom, right? Or if you have, say, a 2 and a 7 who get together, the 2 would be so oriented to the 7, and the 7 being oriented to themselves. There's that space of like, do you just take? Right. And so again, it's an 8 being with a 9. I'm happy to tell you how the world needs to look.
And the 9's happy to
take it.
Let you take charge.
Correct.
And in unhealth, that's what we do.
And that having that roadmap of something that is not only an understanding, but a space to begin exploration. Maybe because, I think about in any realm, I don't care what your number is, if someone says, go paint the universe, that's overwhelming. But if somebody says, hey, I want you to start here, I want you to explore this area, I want you to see what you think, what resonates with you, even the tool itself is self-discovery. Brilliant.
And I think the other great thing about the Enneagram is it is a tool of self-discovery. And in our egoic way of being, it's so much easier to see the flaws in others, to want to blame others, and not to look inward at the self. But once we take ownership, once we start doing the work, even the things that others do that maybe used to really bother us or annoy us, they start to be more minimal and diminish the impact that others' ways of being used to impact us in a big way. One of my favorite things that I kind of discovered this year is where I can't remember whether it's Matthew, Mark. I'm sorry, I don't have the address for it, but where the man comes to Jesus at this, and it might be the parable of the sheep and the goats, and they come to Jesus and he says, get away from me, I don't know you. And they said, but I did this in your name, and I did this for you, and I did this for you. And it seems so harsh what Jesus is saying, get away from me, I don't even know you. And what I learned this year, and I don't know where I heard this or discovered this, but it was Jesus saying, you're coming to me in your false self. I don't know the false self. I know the true self that I created. And that's how you come to me. That's who you are. That's who I made you to be. And it is beautiful, and it is perfect, and it is lovely. And we keep trying to perform our way through this world and prove things, and we don't need to do any of that with him.
Yeah. And what a beautiful space it could be that we would have a community where we didn't have to do that with each other.
Yeah.
Not to say that we could live out of a place of being reckless, but that we could live authentically and say, yeah, that is me, but I also need to consider you.
Yes.
And that we have space for each other.
Yes.
That we could allow ourselves to grow in authenticity.
Right.
And that would be following what his whole plan was for us, is to live authentic, to live out of our true sense of who we are.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful that you all offer this to corporations, to businesses, to families. And what a beautiful service, and what a wonderful tool. So thank you for coming and sitting down with me to talk about this. And every time we talk about this, I feel like I always learn something. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It is a blast. It's so much fun. We feel like we're sevens when we're doing it.
I love it.
If you found value in our discussion and wish to uncover more about the fascinating world of mental wellness, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where Dr. Long will continue to delve into empowering therapies and strategies for mental wellness. Your journey to understanding and embracing mental health is just beginning, and we're excited to have you with us every step of the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember to celebrate restored freedom as you uncover it.